Welcome back to the channel. I've been enjoying these, so I'm going to keep doing them. It's been interesting to find out more about the states. I mean, I have in the past learned about each of the states because, you know, we do it in school. We do that as part of our history, our history classes. However, I can't say that when we've done the states, we've focused on things like industry and tourism and things like that. It's a lot of the times it's just I've known for a very long time that Florida was originally settled and explored and settled by the Spanish, and that we purchased or acquired Florida from Spain at some point in our history, but I was unaware of a lot of the specifics. I know that Florida is somewhat unique in even in the states because of where it is and things like that. So Florida, it's called the Sunshine State, and there's a good reason for it being called the Sunshine State. So Florida is that red part on the map there. It achieved statehood in March 3rd, or on March 3rd, 1845. It was the 27th state to join the Union. The capital of Florida is Tallahassee. It has a population of 22.2 million people, which makes it the third most populous state in the United States. Kind of interesting thing about Florida here is that up until the 20th century and really into like the 1970s, Florida was very sparsely populated. It wasn't until like the 60s and 70s that people started moving into Florida, and it became the third most populous state. It really had a boom there at one point. The state is 65,758 square miles, which is 170,312 kilometers squared. And that makes it the 22nd state overall as far as area. The four largest cities in Florida are Jacksonville, Miami, Tampa, and Orlando, in that order. So the capital of the city, I actually looked this up. It's the 8th largest city, so it wasn't. Yeah, it was four more down on the list here. So not very big as far as its importance to the rest of the state. As I said, I've known for a very long time that Florida was settled, colonized, and explored by the Spanish. Juan Ponce de Leon landed in Florida April 2nd, 1513. And he called it Florida because of the abundant greenery in Florida. I gather that Florida means something like flower or flowering. So there was a lot of, I mean, Florida is pretty well known for the plant life. Not just plant life, but also the animal life as well. Apparently, there's some debate about Florida and the exploration from Ponce de Leon, the reason that he came to Florida. Apparently the story that he was looking for the Fountain of Youth, which I was taught when I was in school, that apparently didn't get started until sometime after his death. That's why. So it could be that he went to Florida to find the mythical Fountain of Youth, but whether or not that was actually the reason he went to Florida, there's some debate on that. The first settlement was started near what is present-day Pensacola in 1539. It was largely abandoned. Then later in 1565, St. Augustine, Florida was established, and it is the oldest continuous European settlement in the United States. The thing is that it's not the oldest settlement in the United States, nor is it the oldest European settlement in the United States. It's just the oldest continuously inhabited. For instance, the French came along in 1564 and they established Fort Caroline. So that was before the establishment of St. Augustine. But the Spanish were not happy that the French were horning in on their territory, and so they destroyed it. There are other settlements further north that also didn't make it. I know the Roanoke settlement in, I think it's North Carolina, but we may come to that later. That was established, but it didn't succeed either, and so it was abandoned. Anyway, the friction between the settlers at this point in time was not going away anytime soon, and so the French claimed the land to the west, the English claimed the land to the north. So Spain didn't really have a lot of opportunity to expand their territory because they were hemmed in on those two sides. And in fact, in 1763, Spanish traded Florida to the English. They gave it to the English right out, because the English during the 7 Years' War, they claimed Havana, Cuba, and Spain wanted to get Havana, Cuba back, so they gave Florida to the English. The thing is that then the American Revolutionary War happened, and Florida remained loyal to England at that time, or at least the English that were there in Florida. The Spanish that were there in Florida and the French probably didn't care one way or the other. But after the British were defeated in the Revolutionary War, control of Florida reverted to Spain. So it was, again, not part of the original 13 colonies or anything like that, because it was not owned by the English or the territories that were traditionally English, and so it wasn't considered part of the 13 colonies. And then again, control reverted to Spain anyway. The U.S. then purchased Florida from Spain in the Adams-Onis Treaty, or Onis, Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819. Prior to that, there had been some friction between U.S. and Spain. Some American settlers tried to go into Florida and overthrow the Spanish government in 1812. The Spanish actually encouraged slaves to escape from their slave owners and go to Florida. They were guaranteed their freedom if they converted to Christianity. And it could be that some of them were already converted to Christianity, and so it really didn't matter. And escaping there meant that they were given their freedom, and freedom from the United States, because it was owned by the Spanish, not by the Americans. So the United States ended up purchasing Florida from the Spanish, as I said, in 1819. And then we embarked on the Indian Removal Acts. Gotta catch my throat there. Sorry about that. So a lot of the Native American population was removed from Florida. However, there was a small population that remained behind in Florida that resisted the removal orders, and there's still you go down to Florida and there's still quite a bit of you can see the influence from the Native American tribes and things that were in the area. The place names and things are still known by what they were prior to the Indian removals. So then in 1845, that's when, again, I mentioned before that that's when Florida became a state. It came in, ironically enough, as a slave state. So prior to joining the United States, there were no slaves in Florida. The Spanish didn't encourage it. The Spanish had, in fact, encouraged slaves to escape to Florida, and they freed them at that point. So, funnily enough, it became a slave state when it entered the Union. It was one of those compromises between free states and slave states at the time when they were granting. This was prior to the Civil War, so when they were granting statehood, they were trying to maintain a balance between slave states and free states. They didn't want, neither side wanted the other side to gain too much power. And so when a state was admitted to the Union, they'd have to look around and see which other state they could admit to the Union around the same time that was opposite to that particular state's stance on slavery. So it was admitted as a slave state, as I said, ironically enough. During the Civil War, Florida provided mostly provisions and supplies. They didn't provide a lot of troops. There were some troops from Florida that fought on the side of the Confederacy, but mostly it was provisions and supplies and things like that they provided to the Confederate Army. Post-Civil War, it's interesting enough that the government came in afterwards. The Florida government afterwards, after the Emancipation Proclamation and the freeing of the slaves and all that stuff, they actually set up a lot of laws that disenfranchised and discriminated against blacks. However, that wasn't necessarily their main target because it discriminated against the poor in general. So if you were poor and white, you had the same discrimination leveled against you as someone who was black. Not saying that that was a good thing, just an interesting development. A lot of times those slave states, they specifically targeted the black communities and the free slaves, whereas these were generally against the poor, which at that point in time included a lot of the blacks because they were freed slaves, so they didn't have their own property necessarily, and they started out as poor because the property belonged to the whites, the wealth belonged to the whites, and so it was more discriminatory against the poor than targeting just the blacks in the black community. But post-Civil War, that's kind of the problem that they were facing at the time. Trains really came in and helped modernize Florida at that point, get it more industrialized. The civil rights movement, segregation lasted until the 1960s and 70s. And a lot of African Americans left the state during that time because of the discrimination that they were experiencing. However, because of the 1920s and the Great Depression, so the 1920s started in, and Florida started experimenting with the tourism industry because Florida is the Sunshine State. But it was hindered by the Great Depression. However, the developments of air conditioning and because of the low cost of living in Florida, that actually brought a lot of people back in the modern era. So Florida had a boom in their population growth. And so, like I said, prior to the modern era, prior to the civil rights movements and prior to the development and the I don't know, I don't want to say perfection, but the developments in making air conditioning more affordable and easy to do, that actually brought a lot of people into Florida. Florida is, we'll get into that in just a second, because Florida is right on the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. It's surrounded on basically three sides. I don't want to just say two, but it's basically water on three sides. It's famous for the mangrove swamps and stuff, and so they have their humid subtropical climate. In the summer, it gets into the upper 80s as far as the average temperature goes. In the winter, it gets between the low 40s and the high 70s. So depending on where you are, it could be higher or lower, but in that range. And so in the summer, it's between 32 and 34 degrees Celsius. In the winter, 5 to 25 degrees Celsius. So it's not very cold in Florida. So with the development of air conditioning, it really made it more viable for people to live in Florida. Florida is low. The highest point in the state is Britton Hill. It's 345 feet above sea level, which is 105 meters. It is the lowest point in any state in the United States. It is the lowest high point in any of the states in the United States. So it's high for Florida, but it's low for everywhere else. We would barely consider that a hill. You know what I mean? But funnily enough, Florida happens to be the lightning capital of the United States. Central Florida in particular has more lightning strikes per capita than anywhere else in the United States. It is sunny. They get between 2,400 and 3,200 hours of sunlight per year. That's more than any other state. California, one of the reasons that the film industry opened up in California was because of the light, because of the sun. But Florida is way sunnier. It also has the most tornadoes and hurricanes per state. They don't tend to be as destructive as other states. That's not to say they aren't destructive. It's just that some of the other states tend to have more destruction come about than Florida, apparently. Anyway. Industry in Florida. Aviation and aerospace, life sciences, manufacturing, security, information technology, and of course tourism. So aviation, we have Cape Canaveral Spaceport, we have the Cecily Field Spaceport, and also the Kennedy Space Center. So NASA is huge in Florida. Also Boeing, Lockheed Martin, SpaceX, they all have presences in Florida. The life sciences, Johnson & Johnson, Bausch & Lomb, Mayo Clinic. Manufacturing, we have Siemens and Nucor, both strong presences in Florida. Florida has 20 major military installations and 3 unified combatants commands in Florida. So, yeah. Information technology, Citrix, Motorola, Northrop Grumman, Electronic Arts all have a presence there. And of course, the beaches and Disney World, they are all in Florida. Yeah. So Florida, tourism, beaches. There are beaches everywhere. Pensacola, Panama City Beach, Daytona Beach, Tampa, Clearwater, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Fort Keys, Myers, Naples. They're all over the place. Diving, of course, fishing. They have freshwater fishing and saltwater fishing. You can even camp on the beaches, which I think is pretty cool. Hopefully they have facilities for that kind of stuff. But anyway, if you're looking to camp on the beach, hey, go to Florida. NASA, of course, is down there in Florida. There are plenty of theme parks. I mentioned Disney World before, but they also have Busch Gardens, Legoland, SeaWorld, and Universal Studios down there in Florida. So there's a number of tourist attractions down there. Florida also has over 1,300 golf courses. That's more than anywhere else in the United States. So golf is huge in Florida. Not only that, but the PGA of America is headquartered in Florida. So go figure. They have so many golf courses, and the PGA is there. Trivia. This is kind of my favorite part to look up. When doing research for these things. These are some of the things that you didn't necessarily come across in school. So Florida has football, professional basketball, professional baseball, and hockey and soccer. So in football, they have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they have the Miami Dolphins, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So they have 3 major league football teams. The basketball teams, they have the Miami Heat and the Orlando Magic, so they have two teams. Baseball, they have the Florida Marlins and the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, so 2 there. In hockey, they have the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning, so again, 2 teams. Soccer, they have 1. They have Inter Miami. It's their newest pro team. It just started up in 2020. Florida is the only place on the planet where crocodiles and alligators live in the same habitat. Only place on the planet. The Jacksonville, Florida, is the largest city in the U.S. in the U.S. by size, not by population, by size. It covers the most area of the United States, of any city in the United States. The refrigerator was invented in Florida. Now, what parts of the refrigerator were invented other places, that's a different story. The refrigerator itself was first built there. The first scheduled passenger flight took place in Florida. Yeah. Smallest post office and the smallest police stations in the world are located in Florida. Ochoape, Florida has the smallest post office, and Carabel has the smallest police station. Apparently, the police station is the size of a phone booth, or it is an old phone booth. Yeah, it's an old phone booth. Every year, Florida has an event they call the mullet toss. Now, a mullet is not only a type of hairstyle, which is awful, but it's also a type of fish. And they line up on the border with Alabama, and they throw fish from the Florida side to the Alabama side. Yeah. They throw the fish to see who can throw it the farthest. Yeah, I don't know. Makes no sense to me. Apparently, they started it several years ago as a joke, and they just have kept doing it. Florida, the Florida Keys. Now, if you've ever seen Florida, like a close-up of the Florida map, down at the bottom of Florida, there are several islands that trail off the tip of Florida. Those are called the Florida Keys. Now, apparently, in 1982, the Florida Keys were not happy with some legislation that was aimed at fighting illegal drug trafficking and illegal immigration. And so they declared independence in 1982. Yeah, it lasted 2 minutes. Yeah. If you haven't heard of the skunk ape, that doesn't surprise me. I have heard of it, but I don't remember if I was aware that it was Florida that the skunk ape came from. But I had heard of the skunk ape before. If you've ever played any of the Sam and Max video games, they talk about the skunk ape. Anyway, the skunk ape is the Florida version of Bigfoot. So apparently it got its name because of the fact it stinks. So they call it the skunk ape. You cannot sing in public in a swimsuit in Florida. Doesn't make any sense to me. People are going to be in swimsuits all the time, but apparently singing in a swimsuit is illegal. You cannot skydive on Sunday if you are a married woman. A married man, single woman, you're totally fine. You can go skydiving. Married women apparently cannot on Sunday. Gatorade, the sports drink, was developed in Florida. It is actually not named after an alligator, but it is named after the Florida Gators football team, which is a college football team. It was developed at Florida State University, where the Gators play. No one is allowed to bring a pig to the beach anywhere in Florida. No, wait. It's Miami Beach. Yeah. Miami Beach has a no pigs policy. So if you're thinking about taking your pig to the beach, don't go to Miami Beach. That's illegal. You cannot skateboard in Florida without a license. Yeah, apparently you need a license for everything in Florida. And if you are interested in treasure hunting, more than $2 trillion in lost treasure is located within 60 miles of the Florida coast. Yeah. Over $2 trillion. If I knew where that money was, boy, you bet I would be out there in Florida trying to find it. Anyway, that's it for Florida. We'll be moving on. And I just drew a blank. I was sitting there thinking, which one are we going to do next? And Georgia. Georgia is next. Florida is the only state with an F. Next one, we don't have any states with E's in their name, so obviously that would have been before Florida. But the next one in line is Georgia. So tune in next week. We'll explore Georgia, and hopefully you've been enjoying these. If you have any questions or comments, down below, as always, like and subscribe, and see you next time.